You know, it's easy to think of history as, well, history, something that's done and dusted. But what if I told you that the past isn't just in the past, that it's written into the very laws that govern the land right under our feet? Today, we're going to dig into how British colonial laws completely rewired the Indian subcontinent's relationship with land, and how that legacy is still playing out right now.
So that's the big question, right? This isn't just a history lesson. We're talking about a kind of legal DNA that was injected into the subcontinent a couple of centuries ago, a code that's still running in the background of modern nations like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh.
Okay, so to really get how massive this change was, we've got to rewind a bit. Before the British, especially under the Mughals, the whole idea of owning land, like you own, say, a phone, just didn't exist. The ultimate owner of all the land was the king. Simple as that.
There's actually a term for this, which Karl Marx called the Asiatic Mode of Production. And here's the key thing to wrap your head around. You could have the right to use the land, to farm it, to live on it. That's possession. But you couldn't own it as private property. You couldn't just sell it off to the highest bidder. The land belonged to the community as a whole, represented by the state. It was all about your role and your duties, not about personal profit.
And this table really breaks down how it all worked. You had your Jagirdar, a top-level noble looking after a huge chunk of territory. Under him was the Zamindar, who was kind of like the local manager, collecting the taxes. And at the bottom, you had the Ryot, the actual farmer doing the hard work. Everyone had their place, but, and this is the important part, none of them owned the land.
And then everything changed. The British East India Company showed up. And they weren't just another set of rulers with a different flag. They brought a completely different playbook with them. A capitalist one. For them, it wasn't about governing. It was about one thing and one thing only: maximum profit.
And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. Just look at these numbers. The moment the company got the Diwani of Bengal, which basically means they got the keys to the tax department, look what happened. The tax collected in the last year of local rule was about £800,000. In the company's very first year, it almost doubled. And a decade later, it had more than tripled. This wasn't taxation. This was an industrial-scale extraction of wealth.
The result of this ruthless policy was, well, it was an absolute catastrophe. This number, 10 million, that's the estimated number of people who died in the Great Bengal Famine of 1770. A third of the entire population of Bengal starved to death.
Now this is the part that's truly hard to stomach. During a famine that devastating, you'd think they'd offer some relief, right? No, they actually intensified tax collection. To the company, the deaths of millions were secondary to the profits of shareholders back in London. In fact, from their cold, calculating perspective, this disaster just proved the old system was too messy. They needed a new, more efficient way to guarantee profits, no matter the human cost.
And this thinking led to a legal revolution. The British realized that to secure a predictable stream of income, they couldn't just collect taxes. They had to fundamentally change what land was. They decided to rewrite the entire rulebook. And this is it, the Permanent Settlement Act of 1793. This law did two absolutely game-changing things. First, it invented private property in land. Just like that, land became a product you could buy and sell. Second, it fixed the amount of tax the government would take, forever. This gave the new landowners, the Zamindars, a huge incentive. Anything they could squeeze out of the land beyond that fixed tax was pure profit for them.
And the result? Well, this chart tells the whole story. As landowners chased those profits, they stopped growing as much food for people to eat and started growing cash crops for the global market, stuff like indigo, opium, and cotton. Food production actually went down. Meanwhile, cash crop production went up by a staggering 80%. The land wasn't for feeding people anymore, it was for feeding the British industrial machine.
Now, this new system made a few people very, very rich. But for the vast majority, for the farmers actually working the land, it was an absolute nightmare of debt and oppression. And you know, when you push people that hard, eventually, they push back. And the system was enforced by some truly brutal laws. I mean, get a load of this. Regulation 7 of 1799 basically gave landlords the power to be judge, jury, and executioner. If a farmer fell behind on rent, the landlord could seize everything they owned and even throw them in jail, with no trial, no court, nothing.
And if you want to sum up the entire economic impact of this whole colonial project, well, this quote just says it all. For 200 years of so-called progress, the average person saw zero economic benefit. All that wealth was just being drained away.
So, is it any surprise that the 19th century was filled with peasant revolts? Of course not. And people didn't just take this lying down. Look at this list, and this is just a sample. From the 1830s all the way through the 1880s, farmers rose up again and again, fighting back against this crushing system. All right, so you might be thinking, this is all fascinating history, but what does it have to do with today? Well, the legal architecture the British built didn't just vanish in 1947. It casts a very, very long shadow that we're still living in.
Let's zoom in on one specific piece of legal machinery, the Land Acquisition Act of 1894. This law gave the colonial state incredible power. It could take any land it wanted as long as it claimed it was for a public purpose, or, and this is a big one, a company need.
And this is where the past just crashes right into the present. The original law was built to, say, grab land for railways to ship out resources. But today, in countries like Pakistan, that same legal framework is still on the books. Only now, the idea of public interest has been stretched to cover taking land from farmers to build private, for-profit housing schemes.
This quote from the source material just captures that feeling perfectly. The newcomers have left, but this legal arrangement has not ended, the ghost of which society has not been able to free itself. It's a powerful thought, isn't it?
And that leaves us with a really tough question to chew on. If the basic operating system of a country is still running on code written over a century ago by a colonial power for its own benefit, are we ever really post-colonial? It's something to think about.